Dust drifted like soft ash as I knelt beside the old metal trunk. The smell of damp paper and forgotten years filled the air. My fingers brushed against faded blueprints, brittle receipts, and the faint outline of my father's handwriting on a stack of envelopes. One of them stopped me cold. It had my name, Ellen Brooks, written in his unmistakable slanted letters. The seal was intact, yellowed by time. I could almost feel the heartbeat of that sealed paper, pulsing with the echo of something stolen long ago. Rain beat against the small window of the basement in Queen Anne. The sound mingled with the soft hum of the city above, a rhythm that always reminded me how close and how far happiness could be. I had come here only to clean, to close another chapter of my parents' house before it sold. But when I found that envelope marked Scholarship Acceptance, Northwest Architecture School, 2005, the air changed. For years I had told myself that I simply hadn't been good enough, that the scholarship I applied for had gone to someone better. But now, seeing the unbroken seal, a quiet rage began to rise, slow, deliberate, like water pressing against a dam. The light bulb flickered, reflecting off the dust-covered glass table where old drafting tools lay scattered. My father's voice seemed to whisper through them. Never stop building. Ethan's footsteps creaked on the wooden stairs. "You've been down here for hours," he said, his voice careful, warm. He leaned against the doorframe, his silhouette outlined by the light behind him. "What did you find?" I turned the envelope in my hand, tracing my name with my thumb. A letter that should have changed my life. He stepped closer, reading the words printed across the front. "Scholarship acceptance?" His brows knit. "You never told me you got one." "I didn't," I said softly. "Because I didn't know." A memory surfaced. Lauren, standing on the porch that summer, suitcase in hand, her smile wide and polished for the photos. Mother, Marjorie, crying tears of pride. They said she had earned a scholarship, a full one, that fate was fair. But in that moment, in that damp basement, I knew it hadn't been fate. It had been theft. I remembered Marjorie's voice from those years, smooth and confident, always managing to turn guilt into grace. "You must understand, Ellen. Some people are just born for more." I had believed her then. I don't now. Ethan sat beside me, his palm brushing the back of my hand. "You don't need to dig up ghosts," he said quietly. "You built your own name, your own firm. You made it without them." I smiled faintly, though my chest ached. "Success isn't justice, Ethan. You can build towers of glass, but if the foundation's wrong, they still crack." My voice broke somewhere between bitterness and exhaustion. He sighed, looking around the room. The walls were lined with rolled-up drawings, half-finished dreams. "What will you do with it?" I held the envelope up to the light, the paper trembling slightly. "Keep it. For once, I'll be the one holding proof." He looked at me for a long moment. Proof of what? That my life wasn't lost by accident. The words hung heavy between us. I slipped the envelope into my coat pocket, feeling its edges press against my heart. A quiet promise. I didn't want revenge, not yet. What I wanted was the truth. Who decided that I wasn't meant to leave? Who stole the letter that could have taken me out of this house before resentment took root? Thunder rolled outside. Somewhere above, a pipe rattled. I rose to my feet, brushing off the dust from my jeans. "We should go," I said. "The house feels heavier when it rains." As we reached the stairs, Ethan turned off the light. The basement fell into shadow, except for a narrow beam catching the brass of an old drafting compass. A glint, like an eye watching. I hesitated. "Ellen?" he asked. "Nothing," I said. "Just thought I saw something move." Maybe it was only memory shifting, or maybe the house itself still remembered what it had hidden. That night, I sat by the window of our apartment overlooking Elliott Bay. The letter lay on the coffee table untouched. I made myself a cup of tea and watched the reflection of the city lights in the water. I thought about 2005, about 18, about all the things I hadn't dared to want. The clock ticked past midnight. The seal still glimmered faintly under the lamp. I reached for my father's old notebook, the one he had left me before he died, filled with sketches of unfinished projects. On the last page, in his handwriting, was a single line: "Everything buried will surface when it's ready." I closed the book and looked again at the letter. Maybe he had known. Maybe he'd tried to warn me. The phone on the table buzzed suddenly, slicing through the quiet. The message glowed in white text across the screen. "Family dinner, 7:30 p.m. tomorrow. Marjorie." I stared at it, my pulse quickening, the rain growing louder outside. "I didn't know," I whispered to no one. That dinner would be the first time, and the last time, we'd ever sit together as a family. It wasn't the steak or the wine that made me choke. It was my mother's eyes when she said, "Lauren deserves Ethan more than you." Marjorie's mansion in Queen Anne smelled like control. Waxed floors, aged mahogany, and the faintest trace of roses cut too early from their stems. The dining table stretched longer than necessary, set for a family that no longer existed. Crystal glasses glittered under the chandelier, catching the soft tremor in my hands every time I reached for water. It was the kind of dinner where the knives shone brighter than the smiles. Ethan sat beside me, posture straight but calm, a man trying not to choose sides in a war he didn't start. Across from us, Lauren looked radiant, too radiant, with that youthful sheen that only people who've never been told no seem to have. She laughed a little too easily, complimented the wine like she'd chosen it herself, and rested her hand near her glass with the poised precision of someone performing innocence. Marjorie opened the conversation with the same grace a surgeon reserves for the first incision. "Ellen," she began, slicing her beef into deliberate pieces, "don't you think you've been wasting Ethan's potential?" Her tone was honeyed poison. The fork paused halfway to my mouth. "I'm sorry?" I asked, though I'd heard every word. "You know what I mean," she smiled thinly. "He's brilliant, charming, reliable, and yet your firm keeps him buried in logistics. I sometimes wonder if love makes you blind to what he could be with the right partner." Across the table, Lauren tilted her head, the perfect picture of reluctant mischief. "If it were me," she said sweetly, "I'd make sure he was happy every day." My throat tightened. The wine burned down like acid. I could feel Ethan's hand tense under the table before he spoke. "I don't look for happiness in other people," he said evenly. "I find it in the person who still believes in me." The room cooled several degrees. Marjorie's smile didn't move, but her eyes sharpened, measuring the distance between my husband's loyalty and her daughter's hunger. Lauren hid behind her glass, but not quickly enough to conceal the flicker of annoyance. "I only meant," Marjorie sighed, dabbing her lips with a napkin, "that not all matches are equal. Sometimes love keeps people where they don't belong." I placed my glass down gently. The click of crystal on wood was louder than it should have been. "You're right," I said, standing up slowly. "We are on different levels. I just didn't realize until tonight what kind." She looked up, curious. "And what kind is that, dear?" "The level called dignity," I said. The silence that followed was almost elegant. Even the candlelight seemed to hesitate, uncertain whether to keep flickering. Ethan looked up at me, not to stop me, not to rescue me, but to anchor me. His gaze said, "Go on." Lauren forced a laugh, the kind that cracked under its own brightness. "Come on, Ellen, we're just teasing." "You know Mom likes to stir things up." I met her eyes. "Some people stir because they can't stand still long enough to see what's sinking." Her face paled. Marjorie's knife rested, forgotten, on her plate. She was watching me now with something I'd never seen from her before. Respect or fear? I couldn't tell which. The meal stumbled on in awkward fragments. Silver clinking, meaningless talk about travel and weather, and the suffocating politeness of people who wish they could leave but won't give the other the satisfaction first. I watched the reflections in the wine glasses. My face fractured, multiplied, fading in each curve of glass. It was strange how easily dignity could look like defiance under the wrong light. Ethan reached for my hand under the table, squeezing once. I didn't look at him. The warmth of his skin was both comfort and warning. He understood, as I did, that this was no dinner. It was an execution dressed in candlelight. When dessert arrived, no one touched it. Marjorie smiled again, thin as paper. "Family should never keep secrets," she said. "They rot in the dark." I rose from my chair. "Then you should check your basement," I answered, my voice calm but trembling with the storm I refused to unleash. The ride home was quiet. The city outside blurred into ribbons of light and rain. Ethan drove with both hands on the wheel, jaw tight, eyes forward. Neither of us spoke until the car stopped in front of our apartment. "She's not worth it," he said softly. "It's not about her," I replied. "It's about me not choking again." He nodded, understanding more than I'd said. Inside, the apartment felt smaller than usual, full of ghosts I hadn't invited. I poured myself water, sat by the window and opened my phone to silence the notifications that wouldn't stop vibrating. But there was one new message, from an unknown number. I didn't need to guess. "Let's see how long you can keep him." I stared at the words until the letters seemed to pulse. The night outside was black and rain-smeared, a mirror of the quiet fury building in my chest. I whispered to the empty room, to no one but myself. "Some dinners aren't meant to feed you. They're meant to see if you can swallow your own pride without dying." Monday, she walked into my office. A white dress, a smile, and an internship contract in her hand. The words on our lobby wall caught the morning light first. Integrity in every line. They were laser cut into brushed steel. The kind of corporate motto people stop noticing after their second week. I had chosen the typeface and the placement myself. right above the view line where the city drops away toward Elliott Bay. Some messages deserve to be unavoidable. Today, the letters felt like a mirror held to a performance. Lauren crossed the glass threshold like she owned the reflection. Her white dress skimmed the line between fresh and calculated, the fabric bright enough to claim innocence, the cut precise enough to claim a victory she hadn't earned. She flashed the receptionist a smile and lifted the signed internship packet just high enough for anyone watching to understand that doors open easily for certain people. "Good morning, Ellen," she said, stopping at my office with an air kiss she didn't deliver. "Big day." "First days always are," I answered, standing to shake the hand she kept just out of reach for a beat too long. Her perfume trailed in like the memory of a rehearsal. From down the corridor, Ethan's voice carried through clear glass and concrete. "Conference room in 5, he said to no one in particular. His tone was neutral, administrative, the kind of calm that tells a room who actually leads it. Lauren glanced past me toward his office, then pulled her shoulders back. Camille arrived at exactly the same moment, a slim folder under her arm, hair clipped into the kind of practicality that never needs defending. She nodded to me and then to Lauren. "Ms. King, welcome. I'll need you to sign our Code of Conduct, Data Policy, and NDAs, Standard Onboarding. There's also a short training on file handling and watermarking." "Of course," Lauren sang, taking the pen. "I'm thrilled to be here. And you can call me Lauren." She signed her name in a loopier script than I remembered, like a flourish could make a new person. "Company policy prefers surnames," Camille replied, pleasant, patient. "It avoids misunderstandings." Lauren's eyes flicked to mine. "So formal," she said, laughing. "I guess that's how you've kept things so tidy, Ellen." She set the pen down and smoothed the edge of the paper, as if she'd just ironed our boundaries flat. We filed into the glass-walled conference room where models sat under domes like cities trapped in snow globes. Beyond them, downtown blinked in the sunlight, cranes paused mid-gesture. Ethan greeted the team, taking a seat at the head because that's where the questions go first. I took the side seat where the answers usually begin. "Quick stand-up," he said. "2 priorities. Waterfront hub conceptual development and the Lakeside Hotel renovation. Ms. King will observe on hub for now. She'll assist with materials research and drafting standards." Lauren's smile pressed a little wider. "I'm eager to contribute," she said, letting eagerness sound like entitlement. Ethan nodded without looking at her. "Observation first," he repeated, sliding an iPad toward me. "Ellen's final review on the atrium section is due EOD. Camille will follow up on file hygiene." For a few minutes, we were the machine we know how to be. Updates, deliverables, timestamps that make art into evidence. Lauren listened with the rounded eyes of a student who plans to skip the test. She jotted notes with unnecessary flourish, tapping the pen like applause after each directive that included Ethan's voice. When the floor opened for quick feedback, Lauren leaned forward, elbows just inside the edge of decorum. "Ethan," she said, aiming the name like a private key, "could we add a few more feminine gestures to the atrium? Softer arcs, maybe a more romantic interplay of light?" The room stilled. She'd skipped over 3 lines of protocol and the entire chain of command. I didn't have to look at the wall to see the words there. Integrity in every line. Ethan's reply was a scalpel. "At work, I call you Ms. King," he said, measured and cool. "Not anything else. Please route design suggestions through Director Brooks." A flush climbed her throat, delicate and quick. Around the table, pencils shifted against paper. Someone fake coughed into their sleeve. Lauren exhaled a practiced laugh. Of course, she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Just excited. We like excitement, Ethan said, already moving on. We like process more. Camille watched the exchange with her usual polite stillness, the kind people mistake for softness before they learn it's the safety on a larger weapon. She jotted a note and closed her folder. On that, she added, I'll send the link for the digital handling tutorial. It's 15 minutes. Please complete it before accessing project directories. Lauren's smile didn't reach her eyes. Happy to, she said. I'm a quick study. By noon, the studio had regained its rhythm. Printers whispered. Plotters fed paper into careful mouths. In my office, the scale model of the waterfront hub threw a clean shadow that cut the desk in half. Day divided from intention. I reviewed the atrium lighting sequence, annotating the plan with small arrows only I would read the way they were meant. Through the glass, I could see Lauren touring the materials library with an assistant, fingertips brushing surfaces as if texture came off on skin. Ethan passed my doorway without entering, a glance like a pulse. We didn't need to speak. We'd always worked best that way. Parallel tracks, same destination. At 3, Camille pinged me. Orientation complete. Ms. King has network access. Audit log activated. I typed a simple thanks. The point wasn't to trap anyone. The point was to know the shape of the maze if a rat insisted on running it. Late afternoon turned the studio gold. Lauren returned from the library carrying swatches she hadn't yet earned the right to love. She paused under the lobby motto, angled her head for a selfie that included both her smile and the word integrity, then vanished into a huddle of junior designers who didn't know yet when not to encourage a story. By 6, most of the team had gone. I stayed, as I always do, in the quiet hour when the air belongs to the work and the building breathes. Ethan walked in, loosened tie, sleeves rolled once. He placed a coffee on my desk and took in the model with a satisfaction he didn't bother turning into words. She'll try something, I said finally. He nodded. Probably tonight, he answered. Will we stop her? We'll watch, he said. And remember. The city dimmed. The studio became a series of islands. The green glow of exit signs, the cool hum of servers, the steady blue eye of the security camera. I packed my bag and left just after 7, the elevator reflecting my face back to me 4 times, each version more distant than the last. At home, the view of the bay was a flat sheet of dark steel. I pretended to read, unable to keep my eyes from the clock. At 10, my phone buzzed once, then again. Camille's messages arrived without drama, the way truth does when it doesn't need to shout. Unusual activity. Temp intern credentials used to access /projects/waterfront_hub. Download initiated on station D17 at 1942. Camera confirms presence in materials library and workstation corridor. My lungs forgot what to do for one long beat. A final message followed, accompanied by a still frame. Lauren's profile in the cool light of a monitor, hair tucked behind her ear. The white dress replaced by a hoodie, like a disguise borrowed too late. Her hand hovered over a USB port. A progress bar glowed on screen, one more line she didn't care to read. The last message was a single sentence from Camille, precise and spare, as if she were pinning a label on a specimen no longer in motion. The internal camera captured Lauren copying the Waterfront Hub project files. Camille, I don't catch errors. I only keep the log. The big screen showed the design. and I saw every one of my lines under someone else's name. The conference room was a glass aquarium of attention, daylight ricocheting off models and steel. On the wall, the waterfront hub bloomed across a 70-inch display. A roofline like a held breath, a long bending sweep that kissed the sky, an oculus at the atrium's heart to pour daylight down like a promise. The rendering was careful, expensive, hungry. The credit in the corner read, Concept, Lauren King. My chest tightened with a recognition that came from the muscles, not the mind. I knew those curves. I knew the way the promenade turned inward just before the water's edge, to make people feel gathered instead of displayed. I knew it because I had drawn it, in pencil, a dozen times before the software ever touched it. Lauren stood with a remote in her hand and the kind of smile that pretends to be modest while counting its audience. "As you can see," she said, pacing the front of the room, "the roof arcs provide a feminine counterpoint to the waterfront's industrial inheritance. The light well anchors the circulation spine, pulling visitors through a choreography of brightness and shadow." I looked at Ethan. He didn't look back. He kept his gaze on the screen, legs crossed, hands quiet on the table. A neutrality so steady it might have been carved. Camille sat 3 seats down, pen balanced between 2 fingers, expression unreadable. Around the table, the younger designers leaned forward with the forward tilt of people who want to believe in something. Lauren clicked to the next slide, a section perspective of the oculus with a ring of clear story windows, the structural ribs tapering to a fine line at the glass edge. Not identical to my sketch, but unmistakably descended from it, like a child with a new last name. I lifted my eyes to the wall behind her, where the company motto hung in cold steel, integrity in every line. The letters looked heavier than usual, as if they knew they were being asked to hold more weight. When she opened the floor, I kept my voice light. "Miss King," I said, folding my hands, "could you talk about what inspired that roof break and the oculus proportion?" She paused for half a second too long. "Well, I've been studying coastal forms," she said brightly, "and the interplay between water and sky." I wanted something evocative but approachable, like daylight as a material. "Daylight is always a material," I said gently. "Which studies did you look at? Any precedents?" She clicked to a slide of a museum half a continent away, then another of a bathhouse with a hole in the roof. The references were safe, generic, plausible to anyone who didn't know how my pencil had once slowed at the exact point her rendering bent. She swallowed and kept going, a dancer landing a step she hadn't rehearsed enough. Camille's pen moved without sound. Date, time, slide numbers, the small particulars by which reality remembers itself when memory tries to forget. One of the juniors, a kid named Marco who still believed that speaking truth out loud was how you kept your job, blurted it before the room could decide to be polite. "Didn't I see that oculus in Ellen's sketchbook a few months ago?" he asked, brow furrowing, eyes sliding instinctively toward me as if to confirm this was a compliment and not a crime. Silence struck like a door slamming. 5 seconds. I counted them because I needed somewhere to put my hands. 1, 2, 3, the HVAC whispered. 4. Lauren's smile trembled, then steadied. 5. Ethan uncrossed his legs and leaned back just a fraction. "I enjoy coincidences," he said, and the room inhaled. "Especially when they can be proven." The heat that climbed Lauren's neck was elegant and quick. She let out a small laugh that wanted to be feminine grace and landed as static. "Great minds, I guess," she said. "Besides, we all work from the same library of ideas, don't we?" "Libraries record sources," I said softly. "They don't erase authors." She looked at me then, cleanly, openly, the way a swimmer looks at the shore right before the wave breaks. "I'm not suggesting anything was erased," she said. "I'm only presenting a direction." I nodded. "Then you won't mind walking us through the parametrics behind your oculus ratio, or the wind load calcs that informed the roof curvature?" "If the concept is yours, the logic will be too." A beat of quiet, thinner this time. She lifted another slide, numbers that floated like decorative snow. They didn't attach to anything. An engineer across the table shifted, sensing the way a structure fails on paper before it fails in the world. Camille closed her notebook. The sound was surgical. "We can schedule a technical review this afternoon," she said, tone mild, "if you share your working files." "Of course," Lauren said. "I'll send them after lunch." I let my gaze return to the rendering, to the roof I had imagined years ago when we were still fighting for our first municipal grant. There's a difference between being copied out of admiration and being copied to be erased. One lifts you and admits its debt. The other covers your name with a coat of paint and calls it weather. "Some people copy because they admire," I said, not raising my voice. "Some copy so the real author disappears." Lauren met my eyes with perfect calm. "I don't disappear people," she said. "I bring things into the light." "That," I answered, "depends on who's standing in it." The room exhaled and rearranged itself into tasks. Questions about materials, about shade coefficients, about how the plaza paving would perform in winter. Ethan ended the review at the exact moment authority becomes mercy. "We'll reconvene after the technical," he said. "Good work, everyone." His eyes never touched mine, which is how I knew he'd seen everything. As the team filed out, Lauren lingered at the door, the remote small in her hand. "Director Brooks," she said with sweetness lacquered over steel. "I'm happy to collaborate closer, if you feel your original ideas need guidance." "They need honesty," I said. "Guidance they already have." She left the room on heels that sounded friendlier than she was. I stood alone with the frozen sunlight of the rendering and the taste of old graphite in my throat. Through the glass, the motto sat above the city like a judge who refuses to come down from the bench. Camille reappeared in the doorway. "Technical at 3, she said. "Bring your sketchbook." "Will she bring hers?" I asked. Camille's mouth curved in a smile too slight to register as comfort. "She'll bring what she has," she said. "The rest, the logs have." After lunch, the technical review turned into a polite autopsy. Questions tightened, answers thinned. When numbers didn't match, Lauren pivoted to adjectives. When details cornered her, she complimented the team. By the end, what remained was a sleek shadow with nowhere to stand. I returned to my office to find the late sun rubbing gold across the models. I closed the door and sat with my hands flat on the desk until my heartbeat agreed to be ordinary. I could have confronted her then. I could have pulled my old sketchbook from the shelf, flipped to the pencil-soft page where the oculus is born from a circle found under a coffee ring. But truth without timing is just noise. And I was done making noise for people who called it drama. My phone buzzed. I expected a calendar alert or Camille's tidy summary. Instead, The notification was a message request from an unknown number. No avatar, no introduction, just a single line, spare and clean as a scalpel. I have the original copy of your portfolio, AK. The old woman in the blue knit hat handed me a faded notebook. Back then, I feared the truth would break a family. Now I hope it can save a soul. Ballard was the kind of afternoon that kept its voice low, rain stippling the windows, bicycles glistening like seals along the curb, gulls drifting overhead as if even the sky were considering restraint. The cafe smelled of cinnamon and wet wool. Agnes King sat across from me, small and straight-backed, her blue hat as steady as the way she watched my face. She slid the notebook a little farther across the table, fingertips lingering on the cardboard cover as if it might ask to stay. I kept it because I thought someday it would matter, she said. I didn't know it would take this long. The elastic band cracked when I pulled it free. Inside, the copies were grainy and gray, the kind of photocopies that tattoo the edge of the page with the machine's heartbeat. But the lines, they were mine. The roof sweep I had worried into existence during a winter of cheap coffee. The oculus proportion I had coaxed from a circle the day I'd spilled espresso and called the stain an omen. On the bottom right corner, in the margin where I always practiced a better signature, the ink bloomed slightly in the loop of the B. The same technical pen ink my father had bought me at the hardware store on 15th, when money was too thin for art supplies but he'd insisted good tools paid for themselves. I ran a finger above the marks, not touching. "How did you get these?" I asked. Agnes folded her hands. "I saw Lauren take your portfolio," she said simply. "She was quick. I was quicker once." I followed her into the hallway, but I didn't want a scene. She went out the back door. So I went to the church office and copied what I could from the drafts you'd left on the dining table. I hid them. I told myself I was protecting everyone from a fight that would never end. Her voice thinned. Back then, I thought silence keeps a roof from caving in. But silence is just another kind of weight. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out more gently than I expected. It wasn't accusation that filled my mouth. It was fatigue. "Because I didn't want you to know how much your mother preferred a story over a child." Agnes's eyes shone and didn't spill. "I was a coward, Ellen. I thought if the lie kept the peace, it was a lesser sin. I was wrong." We sat with that. Outside, a bus sighed and moved on. The barista called someone's name, and the sound clattered against the windows before falling quiet. "People are afraid the truth will break a family," I said, closing the notebook carefully. "I'm afraid lies hold it together for too long." Agnes's smile was small and full of weather. "You sound like your father." I swallowed. I don't remember sounding like anyone. I just remember wanting to draw without asking permission. She reached across and patted the back of my hand, a touch so light it left the impression of warmth more than heat. "Take it," she said. "Do what should have been done." I photographed every page, logging each image with the tidy naming schemes Camille loves. Then I dialed her. She answered on the second ring, the way people do when they've been waiting their whole lives to be needed usefully. "Sending you scans," I said, "from Agnes. Photocopies of my original portfolio." On it. I could hear keys, a second keyboard in the background, that tireless percussion that keeps the world honest. "What's the source?" "Church office copier, circa forever. But the ink looks like technical pen. same as my old set. I'll check halftone patterns and copy your timestamp artifacts, she said. Sometimes the machines imprint sequence codes. If we can tie a date to this, we can tie a story to a door. While the pictures uploaded, I told her what Agnes had told me. Camille didn't make the noises people make when they are impressed or scandalized. She catalogued, placed, nested each fact, as if arranging evidence inside an invisible drawer. "Got them," she said. "Give me a minute." I watched Agnes stir her tea without drinking it. The spoon turned and turned, the cup holding its small storm. "I should have spoken sooner," she said without looking up. "But I thought the adults would fix it. Then the adults were the problem." The phone was back in my ear. Camille's voice was brighter, sharpened by certainty. "The copier had an internal date ribbon," she said. "The halftone pattern and the side marks point to a Canon unit we used to see everywhere. The ticker string on the margin." "Yes. This batch was made in 2005. The week stamp puts it 3 days before Lauren submitted her application. That's definitive." Something in my chest that had been clenched so long it had learned to pretend it was a bone finally released. The cafe tilted for a breath and then held steady. I put a hand on the table to keep from floating up. "Say it again," I asked. "In 2005, Camille repeated, unhurried. 3 days before her submission, which means these copies predate the formal portfolio file associated with Lauren's acceptance, which means your work existed before her claim. We can anchor this." I closed my eyes. The rain outside had shifted from stipple to soft lines, as if even the weather were willing to underline the page. Agnes was watching me, her hand still around the cup as if warming a small, cold bird. "Thank you," I told her, "for doing the wrong thing then and the right thing now. I'm sorry you had to be the cost of my learning." She lifted her chin. "I'm old enough to admit it. That has to matter somewhere." "It does," I said. "It matters here." We left the cafe together. I walked her to the corner where the crosswalk waits for the cautious and the wise, and I waited until she made it across. My phone buzzed again. A new message from Camille. "I'll file a preservation notice and mirror the images to legal. Keep the originals secure. We're no longer collecting whispers. We're collecting proof." On the drive back, Ballard unfurled into wet streets and neon signs born to swim. I held the notebook on the passenger seat as if it were a living thing that could bruise. At a red light, I opened it one more time, and the discovered past looked up at me like a girl I almost remembered being. My father's pen strokes were there in the way the ink thickened when the line slowed to reconsider. I could smell graphite that wasn't there. By the time I reached the studio, the sky had dimmed to that northwestern gray that passes for evening. I went straight to my office and slid the copies into the flat file, slot 3B, the one I reserve for plans that aren't ready to be seen until they are. Ethan stood in my doorway, hair damp from the walk back from a meeting. He saw my face and didn't ask. He just stepped in and closed the door. "We can move," I said. "Not with anger. With documents." His mouth quirked. "The only architecture that lasts." I pulled out my phone to sync Camille's archive and caught a new notification from the operations calendar. It was just a line item, one more event in a feed that pretends to be neutral about consequences. But the letters were large in my head, marching into a room I'd avoided naming until now. The schedule slid into view on the screen. Client pitch day. Presenter, Lauren King. Not every trap has bait. Some traps are disguised as a perfect opportunity. 9 a.m. The conference room at Carter plus Brooks had that Monday shine. Glass walls rinsed of fingerprints, models dusted, the city outside pretending to be orderly. The motto on the lobby wall, integrity in every line, caught the light like a blade. We took our seats as if it were any other status meeting. It wasn't. Ethan led with the kind of calm that buys attention without spending a word too many. "One update before we break out," he said. "Ms. King will lead an auxiliary concept for the Lakeside Hotel renovation. It's a sandbox, small scope, clear constraints, quick iteration. Deliverable? A presentable schematic by Friday." Lauren straightened as though a crown had been placed precisely where she'd been saving space. "I won't waste it," she said, smile wide. "I'll surprise everyone." "I hope not," Ethan replied, dry. "Good work aims for inevitability." Camille slid a slim folder across the table to Lauren. Tabs a quiet rainbow. "You'll find your access credentials, the asset tree, and the style guide. We've enabled automated watermarking. Timestamps embedded in exports and screen captures. IT will mirror your working directory every 4 hours." Lauren skimmed the pages with a practiced flick, as if speed proved fluency. "Of course," she said. "I love structure. It keeps creativity honest." "Structure keeps memory honest," Camille said, pleasant as an elevator chime. "Creativity handles itself." I let relief touch my mouth like a rehearsal. "Good luck, Lauren," I said, light as lint. "Fresh eyes can be useful on a heritage property." "Thank you, Ellen," she answered, my name polished until it sounded like a door handle. We moved through the agenda: fire ratings, glazing schedules, an RFI that refused to resolve itself without a site visit. On the screen, Lauren's task column filled with bite-sized steps: precedent scan, massing studies, atrium light tests. It was a clean list, the sort that lulls ambition into thinking it has a map. When the meeting adjourned, the room dissolved into the usual shuffle. Laptops snapped shut, chairs whispered, pens were pocketed like secrets. Lauren lingered just long enough to catch Ethan near the door. "I'll give the Lakeside brief my full attention," she said. "It feels aligned with my sensibilities. The client wants soft modern, and I have a touch for..." "Deliver clarity," he said, not unkind. "Leave touches for the client to add or remove." She nodded and left with the buoyant stride of the newly anointed. Through the glass, I watched her pause beneath the steel letters in the lobby, phone raised to frame the words and her smile in the same shot. She loved reflections. She thought they were proof. Camille waited until the door closed before speaking. "Logging is active," she said. "File and screen watermarks on. We'll see every hand that touches a line." "Will she notice?" I asked. "She'll notice the rules," Camille said. "She'll assume they're for other people." Ethan turned to me, and a private sentence passed between us without sound. "Hold." He picked up the stray agenda sheet Lauren had left behind, considered it, set it down again. "The fish already bit," he murmured, just for me. "Now we wait for her to yank the line." The day settled into its work song. Lauren set up camp near the materials library, unfolding fabrics as if they were arguments in her favor. She asked a junior to pull case studies, leaned over their monitor, and pointed with a nail that had been painted the color of conviction. Twice, she drifted past the waterfront hub model, fingers hovering above the roof curve like a dowser feeling for water. I watched, then looked away. an indifferent tide. By noon, drafts began appearing in her directory. A massing block with a concave gesture toward the lake. A sketch of an oculus flirting with the center line. Shadows mapped like theater cues. Camille's dashboard noted each save with the secular piety of a bell. 12:04 export. 12:06 screenshot. 12:11 clipboard capture denied. 12:18 export. Timestamps stacked. A little staircase no one could pretend not to see later. At 2, Lauren floated by my doorway with a brightness meant for witnesses. "Quick thought," she said. "What if the atrium carried a ribbon of light from lobby to water, like a soft path? It could feel feminine, but not fragile. It could feel obvious if it isn't earned," I said. "Let the structure decide what light can afford." She laughed, as if I had complimented her wardrobe. "I adore when you talk like that," she said, and moved on. Ethan worked on the opposite side of the floor all afternoon, sleeves rolled, voice low, meeting with consultants who appreciate sentences that end in verbs. He never once looked in Lauren's direction. That, more than anything, told me he was watching. At 4:30, Camille stepped into my office with a tablet under her arm. Her machine tried to open the waterfront hub folder, she said, voice even. Access denied, as set. She backed out, returned to Lakeside. You were right about her. She prefers the door unlocked. When it isn't, she jiggles handles. I don't need to strike, I said. I only have to let them slip on the staircase they built. Camille's mouth twitched. I'll bring them up, she said, and left. By 5, the studio began its usual shedding of bodies and noise. I stayed, as I do, letting the quiet raise its shoulders around the work. Lauren was still at her station, the glow of her screen painting an ambition mask across her face. She tapped, dragged, duplicated. Her drafts grew more confident, the way a forged signature steadies with repetition. Ethan appeared in my doorway as the sky turned copper, a to-go cup in his hand like a signal. Walk? He asked. We stepped into the corridor where the glass showed us as faint strangers. Camille has more than enough, he said softly. But we'll take more. She'll want to impress. Tomorrow we nudge. By Friday, she'll present something she can't explain. People like her never explain, I said. They narrate. He smiled at that, the quick, private kind. We'll give her an audience, he said. And then we'll give the audience context. When I finally packed up, the city had traded its afternoon glare for evening's patient glitter. I took the stairs down, habit, superstition, penance, past the motto again, and felt its weight settle on my shoulders in a way that didn't hurt. Outside, the air tasted like rain that had changed its mind. My phone buzzed as I crossed the sidewalk. A single message previewed on the screen. The kind of text that thinks it's a secret because it arrived in the dark. I didn't need to open the thread to guess the sender, but I did anyway, because proof deserves the courtesy of being seen. Almost done, Mom. He will choose me, not her. The final draft I sent last night had vanished. In its place was an older version, lines glitching, proportions off, like a private joke made public. The notification hit before coffee. A project manager pinged me in the team channel with a clipped, "Your atrium file's broken, bad line weights, wrong scale. Did you mean to revert?" For a second, I thought I'd misread the timestamp. I opened my own exports and felt the floor tilt. The clean set from midnight, gone from the shared directory. replaced by a sloppy cousin I barely recognized. The oculus overshot its centerline. The roof ribs thinned in the wrong place, a fracture waiting to happen. It was the kind of error that marks you as careless, the kind that lingers when clients start to doubt. I stared at the screen until the letters of the file name blurred. WH Atrium Final V17 had been swapped with V12. The metadata claimed a normal save at 2:17 a.m., the hour when good work sleeps and bad decisions go shopping. Agnes's words from Ballard rose like steam. Silence had once protected the wrong person. I'd swallowed a lot to keep a family shape intact. This wasn't a family. This was a company built on the premise that buildings don't stand if foundations lie. I walked to Camille's glass-walled office, where the day was already arranged in neat columns and alerts. She glanced up once and slid a second chair out with the toe of her shoe. "Tell me," she said. I did, briefly. Her hands moved before I finished, keyboard, console, a window of logs unfolding like a patient unbuttoning a hospital gown. She traced the file's history with the care of someone restoring a painting strand by strand. "There," she said after a measured breath. At 2:17 a.m., access from temp_intern_03. 2 minutes later, a delete of V17 and a write event, V12, to the same path. A screen capture at 2:20, then a credentials switch back to king.l at 2:24. She tapped her pen against the desk, a small metronome. The camera in corridor C saw motion at 2:16. East stairwell, hoodie, female build. She kept her head down. But the badge reader caught the torso angle, the height. It's enough for internal purposes, not for court. Yet I felt the anger land. Not a flare, a weight. So she didn't just copy. She tampered. Camille nodded. "This is sabotage, minimally. We don't call it yet." "Why not?" "Because we don't want the performance of outrage," she said. "We want a quiet map that leads to one door." She looked up. "Will you be okay to keep working?" "I'll fix the file," I said, "and I won't whisper about it." We restored V17 from the mirror, relocked the path, and set alerts that would ping if anything so much as breathed near the directory. The office's morning clatter resumed around us. Printers spitting, a laugh ricocheting down the hall. The elevator delivering people who still believed offices were neutral. Ethan joined us 10 minutes later, sleeves rolled, expression set to administrative calm. Camille briefed him in the same even tone she used for lunch orders and subpoenas. "She used the temporary intern credentials," Camille said, shifted back to her own before leaving. "Our footage shows a hoodie and a body that appears female. The timestamps align. I've preserved the logs. No one else's account touched that directory." Ethan rested his knuckles on the desk and listened without interrupting. When Camille finished, he straightened and asked only, "Is the clean set restored?" "It is," I said. He turned to me then. "This will escalate," he said quietly. "We stay boring until it does." "Boring doesn't feel like enough," I answered. The anger in me wasn't theatrical, it was architectural. A building can survive cracks, but it can't survive a lie. "Exactly," he said, with the quick flash of a smile that never reached his eyes. "Companies can handle stress, deadlines, revisions, skeptical clients. They collapse under dishonesty. We'll choose our load path." That afternoon, I took the atrium back apart and put it together again, not because it needed repair, but because I needed to see each joint stand under pressure. I left a breadcrumb of notes in the comments, a language only builders read. This fits, that breathes. Here the light breaks and tells the truth. The day stretched long and thinned. People left in pairs, then singles. By 8, the office belonged to the HVAC and me. I walked the floor the way I sometimes walk a site, listening for a sound out of tune. The materials library held its stacks like quiet witnesses. The model room glowed under a low lamp, the waterfront roof sweet and sure. In the camera dome above the corridor, a red LED pulsed, patient as a lighthouse. On the second monitor at my desk, Camille's admin console showed the heartbeat of the network. Yellow dots for active sessions, green for idle, red for attempted trespass. At 9:03, a red blinked and faded. Someone tugged a locked link and moved on. I pictured slim fingers learning which handles jingle and which don't. By 9:30, I was ready to go home, ready to be a person whose heart rate belonged to sleep. I shut the lights in my office and stood a moment under the edge of the ceiling, where a sliver of the motto from the lobby reflected backward in the glass. Every line, integrity. The grammar wrong, the meaning right. I picked up my bag. In the elevator, my phone buzzed. A message from a senior manager who hadn't checked the morning thread. Why did your drawing regress overnight? Client call at 10. I typed the briefest answer. Issue found and corrected, logs preserved. And felt a strange calm settle. Not confidence, not relief. Something colder. Like the point in a storm when you stop hoping it will miss you and start latching the shutters. Ethan was still in his office when I circled back to say goodnight. He clicked his screen dark and looked up. The lines at the corners of his mouth were deeper than this morning. Aren't you worried she'll keep cutting? I asked. That she'll nick something structural before we can stop her? He thought for a beat. I'm worried about the kind of company we are if we scream before we can prove, he said. We can withstand a few hairline cracks. We cannot tolerate lying and keep our name. That's the only ruin that matters. I nodded. The anger settled into answer. If truth is light, I said, I'm willing to let it burn the dark corners. He held my gaze. Then we'll lift the shades. On my way out, I passed Lauren at a workstation near the back, wearing a sweatshirt with the hood down, hair tidy, eyes bright. She was dragging a curve across a plan with the satisfaction of someone who believes the line belongs to her because her hand is on it. She didn't look up. Outside, the air felt scrubbed, as if the city had chosen a different version of itself in the last hour. I walked to my car without hurrying, the night right on time. In the driver's seat, I exhaled for what felt like the first time all day, then reached for my phone to switch off the company alerts until morning. Another notification slid across the screen, uninvited, urgent. Not a log. An email forwarded from Camille, the subject line stripped, the sender anonymized through a burner that believed in its own invisibility. Camille received an anonymous email. She's copying all the client data. Lauren walked onto the stage like a star, forgetting that every light also casts a shadow. The ballroom of the 5-star hotel had been polished to a sheen that made money look like good taste. Velvet drapes framed a screen big enough to teach a small planet. Cameras blinked red along the back wall. Investors and press clustered at white-cloth tables with the appetite of people who prefer their meals plated and their risks quantified. A banner near the entrance carried the client's logo above the project title in elegant sans serif: Waterfront Hub. I could feel the motto from our lobby, integrity in every line, ghosting my shoulder as if it had followed us here to take attendance. Lauren took the center with the brightness she had rehearsed in every reflective surface she'd ever passed. "Thank you for being here," she said, voice carrying, smile calibrated. The first slides were theater: sunrise pouring over the pier, pedestrians rendered beautiful by proximity to a vision. She talked about feminine arcs and light as a welcoming gesture, moving her hand in the air as if shaping radiance itself. It worked, at first. Heads nodded. A journalist at the press table scribbled a note. Then the questions started, and the room shifted from wanting to be charmed to needing to be convinced. A donor with engineering in his posture raised a hand. "What's your oculus proportion relative to the roof span? How are you handling uplift at the clear-story edge?" Lauren's smile quivered, then held. "We're exploring a suite of options," she said. "It's a delicate balance between poetry and performance." "And the wind loads?" someone else asked, a consultant whose tie said he charged by the hour and was worth it. "Have you modeled the rib taper at the glass interface?" "We are examining comparable precedents," Lauren replied. The slide behind her showed a museum 3,000 miles away and a bathhouse with a hole in the roof. Numbers floated like confetti. Attractive, unattached. There was a murmur, the soft kind that means curiosity has turned to doubt. I felt Ethan's attention sharpen beside me without moving. Camille had folded her hands in her lap, index fingers lightly touching, the steeple of patience. Lauren clicked to another image, her voice sweetening to compensate. "The spirit here is inclusivity. Imagine light guiding." "Where do the calculations live?" the donor pressed, kind but relentless. "If the light is the path, the math is the floor." "Where is it?" The slide stalled. The remote trembled by an eyelash. I stood. "If I may," I said, stepping forward, keeping my tone even, "I'll add the technical frame." The relief in the room was physical. Chairs shifted, pens stilled. Lauren's eyes flicked to me, surprise and something darker slipping across the surface before she smoothed it. I took the second clicker from the AV tech and advanced to a set of diagrams I had carried like emergency oxygen. Rib by rib structural taper. Pressure maps for winter storms off the bay. Daylight factor studies at solstice and equinox. The atrium section with shadow envelopes, traced in a clarity that didn't need adjectives. We tested the oculus at 0.618 of the span to avoid glare collapse at 3 p.m. in winter, I said. The numbers, a cadence my bones remembered. At the clear story, ribs taper to maintain stiffness without creating a thermal bridge. The lift at the glass edge is countered by a concealed compression ring. Detailing here prevents capillary intrusion. The lobby floor carries a luminous flux that decays predictably along the circulation spine. Wayfinding is honest, because the light is honest. I didn't look at Lauren. I looked at the clients, at the people who had brought their questions like tools. The slides did what slides should do. They made truth visible. The man with the engineer's shoulders nodded, once, slowly. The consultant let out a breath through his nose, the sound of a problem meeting its match. A journalist wrote director's voice in the margin and underlined it. Questions came faster, cleaner. Answers found them as if we'd rehearsed together for years, which, in a way, I had. When someone asked about winter maintenance at the plaza, I pulled up a detail of the permeable pavers. When they asked about the atrium's acoustics, I showed the absorption map that kept the space public without letting it ring like a cathedral to loneliness. My voice stayed steady. My hands didn't shake. I belonged to the work, and the work recognized me. Applause began in pockets and then stood up. It wasn't thunder, it was weather breaking. In the corner of my vision, Lauren's smile had calcified into something fragile. She whispered, "Thank you," to the floor. Ethan stepped forward at the mic. Attention gathered but not forced, the way he always is when the building matters more than the builder. "Appreciate the thoughtful questions," he said, "and the clear answers." He let the quiet settle and then placed the names where they belonged. "Allow me to introduce our Director of Design, Ellen Brooks." He paused, letting the syllables find their context across tablecloths and cameras. "Ms. King is an intern in observation on this project." Silence fell as if every light in the room had paused to listen. A fork touched a plate and apologized. I heard a camera click. Lauren's jaw trembled. The hand that held the remote lowered like a flag no one saluted. From the press row, someone asked Ethan how the studio maintained authorship on complex teams. He didn't raise his voice. "We don't have to shout to prove who is real," he said. "The light knows where to fall." The line moved through the room like a beam striking dust. Suddenly, what had always been floating became visible. A few people glanced up at the screen, at the slide that still held my section drawing with its clean geometry. A few glanced at Lauren, whose brightness no longer matched the temperature of the room. We moved into mingling, handshakes that matter, business cards that don't, little plates of food dressed up as promises. Clients asked for follow-ups. Donors asked if we could walk them through the daylight model again. Ethan fielded press with the patience of a man who trusts gravity. Camille stayed within earshot, the quiet archive of the evening already indexing itself behind her eyes. Lauren hovered near me once, breath sugar-sharp, voice low enough to be a secret. "You blindsided me," she said, the words a tremor wearing lipstick. "You blindsided yourself," I answered. "The questions were always going to arrive. I brought answers." She smiled without teeth. "You think that makes you safe?" "It makes the building safe," I said. "That's the point." When the room thinned, I stepped toward the doors to breathe a different air. The corridor outside was lined with mirrors framed in gold, the hotel's idea of destiny. In the closest one, I could see the stage behind me and Lauren approaching, small in the reflection, her hands clenched at her sides. She reached me where the carpet changed to marble. For a moment, we were two women separated by a seam on the floor and a decade of decisions. She leaned in, voice shaking just enough to betray how hard the smile hurt. "You think you've won?" she whispered. "I still have my mother." When the conference room door clicked shut, I knew. Justice was about to find a voice, or be smothered one more time. Floor 15 had the view people fight for. Water, cranes, a slice of sky. It didn't make the air any easier to breathe. Ethan sat at the far end, legal counsel to his right, Camille to his left with a laptop open like a ledger. I slid into a chair with the weight of the scholarship envelope in my coat pocket, a small, sealed heartbeat from another life. Lauren arrived 2 minutes late, glossed and careful. Marjorie swept in behind her without being invited, pearls bright as teeth. Ethan nodded once. "Thank you for coming." "This is a closed session," will be direct. Camille's fingers barely moved on the keyboard. We observed unauthorized access to shared project directories on 3 dates, she said. Most recently at 2:17 a.m. yesterday. Credential used, temp_intern03. The session deleted a current Atrium file and replaced it with an earlier incorrect version. Camera activity in corridor C aligns to the minute Lauren laughed. A delicate, incredulous sound that tripped on its own shoes. Someone must have used my card, she said. You know how badges get passed around. I'd never. Why would I sabotage my own team? Marjorie leaned forward, voice taking the room by the throat. She's young, she said. Ambitious. You're going to ruin a girl's life because you're jealous of her rising? I looked at her, and the old ache didn't rise this time. Since when does youth confer the right to lie? Mother, do you think being young makes deceit harmless? Her eyes flashed, but Camille kept to the map. Badge audits show your credential was used 10 minutes before the access event, Miss King, she continued, steady. And 10 minutes after. The IP path traces to a workstation registered to your login. I've preserved all logs. Timestamps are synced to the server clock. Lauren's hands folded too tightly in her lap. This is a misunderstanding, she said. I've been under guidance, you all know that. If there's a process error, I'll correct it. I was told to be bold. Boldness isn't the same as trespass, Counsel said mildly, as if reading a weather report. Marjorie turned on him. Do you people really think clients care about your little policy museum? They care about results, and she delivers, unlike some. Her glance sliced my way and returned smiling to Ethan. You could elevate this firm with a face the donors want to see. Ethan didn't take the bait. He tapped a key on the remote. The screen washed to gray, then resolved into a corridor footage, a figure in a hoodie moving quickly, head down, phone out. Then a flare of light from a glass case threw a clean reflection, and there she was. Lauren's face, bright as a signature, the hood sliding back for a second as she tucked hair behind her ear. No one spoke. We watched the short loop a second time. It didn't grow kinder. Lauren's shoulders snapped down a notch. She held her chin high. Fine, she said, a breath too high. I was working late. I needed to review files. I didn't realize I was in the wrong directory. Camille switched to another window, a list of events marching in precise rows. The sequence shows deliberate deletion, then overwrite, she said. Not review. Not a wrong click. You knew where you were. Marjorie pounded the table with the softest of fists, enough to rattle a spoon. You vultures, she hissed. You always hated her because she reminds you of what you're not. My daughter doesn't need to steal. She's born to shine. Light doesn't need theft to exist, I said, calm settling into my bones. If telling the truth is called disrespect, then I've owed my conscience for far too long. Lauren's gaze flicked to me, wounded and livid. You've wanted to humiliate me from the start. You did that work yourself, I answered. We're just turning on the lights. Ethan folded his hands. Ms. King, you'll be suspended from access pending a formal review, he said. Legal will conduct interviews and issue a preservation hold. You may provide counsel. You may also provide any technical rationale for your actions. He looked past her to Marjorie. This is a company matter. It won't be resolved by volume. Marjorie laughed, a sound as brittle as sugar glass. "Company matter?" she echoed. "Everything in this room is a family matter. Who hired her? Who protected her? Don't pretend you didn't like the shine while it lasted." Counsel cleared his throat. "We'll follow procedure," he said. "We recommend both Miss King and Miss Brooks refrain from public commentary. Documentation speaks for itself." The room held still, the kind of stillness that comes when everyone finally hears the same clock. I felt the envelope in my pocket again, the soft scrape of paper when I shifted. I thought of 18, of the door that had closed and the woman who had smiled as it did. I wasn't that girl anymore. I didn't need anyone to open anything. I had keys and the patience to use them. Lauren tried one last angle. "If someone wanted to frame me," she said, voice lowered into sympathy, "wouldn't this be exactly how they'd do it?" "You of all people know what it's like to be envied, Ellen." "Envy doesn't leave watermarks," Camille said, almost kindly. "People do." Ethan stood, and the chairs followed. The meeting was over. The room just hadn't noticed yet. For a heartbeat, we were all quiet enough to hear the city through the glass. Horn, gull, rain beginning its measured applause against the windows. I pushed back my chair. "We'll bring whatever else is needed," I said. "Logs, drafts. Originals, I didn't pull out the envelope. Not yet. But the decision to stop being quiet clicked into place like a lock choosing its key. Marjorie's composure fractured. Her voice leapt an octave and found its old familiar aim. "You ungrateful daughter, Ellen!" "Just wait. There's plenty left for you to lose." The whole city sank into fog, and I sank into the hush before a storm. The kind of hush that always announces what can't be undone. Midnight pressed its forehead to our windows. Rain stitched the glass. The bay beyond was a sheet of dark metal. On the table between us lay a fan of drawings, their pale surfaces catching the apartment's thin light, every line a held breath. Ethan set his laptop down and slid a printed letter across the table, as if he were placing a verdict. "They wrote back," he said. "The architecture board and the university's review committee. They're reopening Lauren's thesis and portfolio. They want original source verification." My throat tightened around the relief that pretended to be fear. "You think I should make this longer?" I asked, barely above the rain. "You think I should stretch a fight that's already taken years off my life?" He shook his head. "Not longer," he said. "Finished." The word felt steady enough to stand on. I reached for the letter. Request for original portfolio verification sat in the subject line like a lighthouse. Unromantic, non-negotiable. Under it, a list of what they needed. Dated scans, provenance notes, any corroborating testimony. Agnes's photocopies waited in a folder on the table, their gray halftones proof of a time machine. The notebook smelled faintly of old toner and the past. Ethan poured tea we wouldn't drink. The steam rose and disappeared, a small demonstration of time's manners. We did not turn on music. The only sound was the window's restlessness and the soft, constant hum of the computer, waiting to be used. I opened the folder. Each page was a door back to the room where I'd once drawn with hands I didn't yet know I would need to defend. The oculus proportion glowed through the thin paper. The roof curve still found its balance, like a sentence finally saying what it meant. I scanned again, this time adding a note beneath each image, where it had been drawn, why the line changed where it did. any witness who could swear that this hand was mine. Ethan stood behind me, palms resting lightly on my shoulders. His warmth a boundary I could lean against without leaning away from myself. "You don't owe them quiet," he said. "Not anymore." "Sometimes, to reclaim justice, we have to accept being misunderstood," I answered. The words tasted like iron and truth. Let them say I'm cruel. Let them say I'm relentless. I am. Outside, sirens faded. The rain deepened, finding a harder rhythm, as if someone had turned a page in the weather. I attached the files one by one, naming them the way Camille taught me: date, source, witness. My cursor hovered over send. I thought of Agnes in her blue hat, of the copy machine's old heart beating dates into the margins, of the envelope I'd found in the basement, with my name unopened and my future sealed shut. Ethan bent close enough that his breath moved the hair near my ear. "When you're ready," he said. I clicked. The progress bar crept, 10%, 19, 27, so slow it felt like a test of faith. The rain hit harder, drumming the glass as if the city had chosen to be percussion. 52, 68, 90. A small chime, a small blue check, an ordinary act that changed the shape of the night. Somewhere on a campus that had once looked like freedom, a server accepted what had always been mine. We didn't cheer. We stood in the kitchen's spill of light and let the quiet return to being quiet. Ethan wrapped his arms around me and I let my head rest against his chest, listening to a heartbeat that did not demand courage, only offered it. The laptop screen stayed awake, the email thread still open, the subject line a fault line that had finally moved. We cleaned the table like people who expect morning to arrive. I slid Agnes's copies back into their sleeve and placed them on the shelf above my desk, spine outward, reachable. I washed 2 cups we hadn't used, ordinary tasks, the kind that teach the body how to come down from a height without falling. My phone buzzed once, then again, then a swarm. Notifications stacked like hailstones. I frowned and opened one. A video filled the screen. Lauren's face close, eyes bright with tears perfectly captured by a ring light. Voice trembling at a frequency calibrated for sympathy. "They've been bullying me," she said, breath hitching. "My sister and her husband. They're powerful at work. I can't sleep. If I disappear, they're the reason." 18 years ago, I stood outside the campus gates with empty hands. Today, I return, carrying every stroke of justice. The Northwest School of Architecture had the same soft concrete smell I remembered, rain lifting it into the halls like an old verse. We signed in and were led to a long room paneled in maple, a rectangle of light pooling across the table. At the far end sat 3 academic judges, nameplates tidy, pens aligned. Professor Victor Hayes nodded when I entered, a small, steady acknowledgement that felt like a bridge laid down over years of water. Ethan took the chair beside me. Across from us, Lauren set her jaw. Marjorie's pearls clicked softly against each other, like teeth choosing their bite. The chairwoman spoke first, voice clear as a drafting line. "This hearing concerns allegations of academic misappropriation related to Ms. Lauren King's portfolio and thesis. We will review documentary evidence, hear statements, and determine next steps." Lauren's attorney rose, all calm weather and careful eyebrows. "Members of the board, Stylistic overlap between siblings is not unusual, he began. Shared environment, mutual influence, these are natural. The suggestion that one hand is the only possible author of a line is, frankly, aesthetically naive. I opened my bag and placed the folder on the table. These are dated copies of my original drawings, I said, made in 2005. They include my signature, early, imperfect, and notes in the margin. The ink is from a technical pen my father bought me. The bleed pattern is consistent with that set. Hayes adjusted his glasses. Please, slide them here. He turned each sheet with the care of a conservator. This hatch pattern, he said, tapping the atrium's shadow study, is the very method I taught your cohort to use for daylight mapping. He raised his eyes to the panel. The cadence of these lines, the restraint inside the curve, belongs to a mind I taught, but not in Ms. King's section. Camille's affidavit lay ready. The chairwoman read out the preservation metadata Agnes had inadvertently given us. The copier's halftone code, the week stamp, the church office's old machine marking the margins with a faint ladder of numbers. Evidence doesn't shout. It accumulates. Lauren's attorney tried again. One could argue that both young women were searching for the same language. That later refinement gave Miss King the voice she now possesses. Then the voice should sing consistently, Hayes replied. Quiet but unmovable. He gestured to the screen behind him, where two drawings appeared side by side. My Oculus section from 2005, and a later plate from Lauren's thesis. The left line runs with pressure, then releases cleanly at the curve. The right line trembles. It imitates, but it doesn't understand. The room tightened around the difference. Lauren's face hardened into something brittle. Marjorie gripped her daughter's hand and leaned toward her with a stage whisper that ignored microphones. Don't answer anymore. Silence won't fix a fracture, Ethan said softly. Not to the board, not to us. Just to the air that carries truth better when it's spoken. The judges asked their questions the way architects do, precise, sequential, indifferent to theater. They wanted dates, witnesses, processes. I answered with places and times. The dining table under the north window. The night the Oculus was born from a coffee ring. The hardware store where my father said good tools pay for themselves and bought the pen anyway. I took the pen from my jacket pocket now, his pen, the small nick on the barrel where it had once rolled off a desk, and set it beside the drawings. The board leaned forward, not to be moved, but to be sure. People can steal an opportunity, I said, meeting the chairwoman's gaze. But they cannot keep the truth forever. The last exchange belonged to Lauren, the chairwoman asked her gently, to speak about the sudden shift in her portfolio halfway through her first year. The way her plates changed voice all at once. Lauren swallowed. That was growth, she said. I matured. Show us where the maturation lives then, Hayes said. Demonstrate the proportion sequence of your oculus. Tell us why the ribs taper at those distances. Walk us through your wind model. She looked at the projector as if it might supply an answer. Her mouth opened, closed. I don't have those notes, she said finally. On the screen, the two drawings stayed side by side, one line sure of its reason, one line sure only that it should resemble the first. The rain strengthened against the high windows, a patient percussion. The chairwoman folded her hands. We have sufficient materials to deliberate, she said. We will review the submissions, consult the registrar, and interview additional faculty as needed. Marjorie squeezed Lauren's fingers hard enough to whiten knuckles. "We're done here," she snapped, already half rising. "No," the chairwoman answered, not unkindly. "We are beginning." We stood. My legs felt hollow and grounded at once. Ethan brushed his hand against mine. Once. Enough. We followed the usher out into the corridor where student posters clung to cork like bright leaves against winter. At the exit, the glass doors opened on a courtyard slick with rain. The air smelled of cedar and wet stone. The results of the investigation will be announced within 10 days. I thought the storm had passed, but sometimes what lingers after rain is mud. By morning, the mud had a face and a ring light. Lauren's video flooded every feed, eyes glossy, voice calibrated to break on the right syllables. She framed herself as the wounded one, told the world that her own sister and brother-in-law had controlled, humiliated, and psychologically abused her, that her career was being erased from jealousy. Clips of her tears were cut into loops that fit neatly between errands and outrage. Comments stacked like sandbags. "Stay strong. We believe you. Powerful people always silence women." The algorithm put a halo around her hurt. My phone howled. Reporters, podcasters, even an old classmate asking if I wanted to share my truth. I didn't answer any of them. The only window I opened was the one beside my desk. Beyond it, the bay was slate, the city a dim grid learning how to be honest with itself again. Ethan watched the numbers climb without blinking. "We don't answer rumors," he said, voice level. "We answer with records." Camille was already moving. She drafted a statement for the company site, plain language, no adjectives, then stacked exhibits like bricks. First, corridor footage of the midnight swap, the flare of glass that caught Lauren's face cleanly. Second, access logs that traced the temp_intern_03 credential to her workstation, with server-synced timestamps and IP path. Third, an email from our network administrator, formal and mortified, acknowledging a prior permission misconfiguration and confirming that the new watermarking and mirroring had captured every relevant event since remediation. No flourish, no gloat. Just a ledger. At noon, comms flicked the page live. The headline was a sentence that could sit in a court filing. Company response to recent allegations. Under it, the statement read like a blueprint. Dates, times, sources. Each attachment opened to the same quiet fact. Reality leaves a trail. Press inquiries doubled, then tempered. A few outlets rewrote their early breathless coverage. One posted a split screen. Lauren's tears on the left, a paused frame of her copying files on the right. The juxtaposition didn't accuse. It simply asked the eye to do its job. Still, the comments churned. Some called the proof manufactured. Others accused us of retaliatory surveillance. A stranger with a sunrise avatar wrote that I was a jealous older sister weaponizing corporate power. I closed the tab, not because I couldn't read it, but because I already had. The script is older than any of us. Ethan walked to my desk, gaze steady. "Sometimes silence is the strongest indictment," he said. "We've put the record out. Now let the record work." He opened the site's homepage editor himself, typed one line at the top where clients and interns and the curious all land, and hit publish. "We do not attack anyone. We protect the truth. and the people who deserve it. The sentence sat there like a clean beam across a span. It didn't ask to be liked. It asked to be stood under. The turn wasn't dramatic. It was incremental, like water shifting banks. A structural engineer reshared our post with a simple, "Documentation matters." A city planner commented that the daylight studies track with known conditions. A journalist appended our exhibits to her earlier thread with an update. Company has provided logs and footage, reviewing. Under Lauren's video, the tone thinned. A few of the most fervent defenders deleted their comments. She posted 2 more clips, angrier, then very sweet, before locking her account altogether, setting it to private like a door slammed from the inside. I made tea and didn't drink it. The office hummed in that way only a building can when it decides to be on your side. Camille slid a printed copy of the website statement onto my desk, timestamped, initialed, archived. "For the file," she said. "For the file," I echoed. I felt tired in a new way. Less like collapse, more like a muscle coming down from a long hold. The afternoon wore itself thin. Rain returned, tapping the window, softer now, like a hand that's learned manners. Ethan sat beside me as the light dimmed, our shoulders touching at the edges the way a building's planes meet without argument. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The homepage sentence glowed from a dozen screens across the studio. A quiet canopy. Just before 5, the email arrived. Not from a reporter, not from a troll. From the account that still smelled of polished wood and rain on concrete. Official letterhead. A subject line that straightened my spine as if it had called me by my full name. On the wooden table, the engraved pen my father gave me caught the light. The same type the board had just mentioned. Afternoon washed the apartment in a forgiving gold, the kind of sun that arrives after weather has done its worst. The drawings on my desk looked softer, their shadows thinned. The kettle clicked off and I didn't move to pour. I turned the pen between my fingers. Fine knurling. The tiny nick on the barrel. EB etched along the clip. Proof disguised as a tool. A knock sounded. Gentle, uncertain. Ethan glanced at me, then opened the door. Thomas Brooks stood on the threshold, with his cap in his hands and time in his eyes. He was slimmer than I remembered, silver threaded through the beard he never used to wear. For a heartbeat, we were strangers rehearsing a memory. "I saw the videos," he said, voice careful. "And the school's notice. I should have come sooner." He lifted a small envelope, creased from being held too tightly. "I brought something that might help." We sat at the table. He laid the envelope down and slid out a yellowed receipt and a folded printout. The paper smelled faintly of dust and machine oil, a hardware store's afterlife. "Back then I sent tuition, month after month," he said, eyes on his hands. "Your stepmother told me you dropped out, that you didn't want the money, that you were done with all of it. I believed the adult in the room when I should have asked the kid. When I saw your name in that hearing notice, I understood what my silence had cost." He pushed the receipt toward me. March, 2005. Precision Tech on 15th. Engraved technical pen, Ellen Brooks. The print was neat and indelible. The date sat like a nail holding a beam in place. My throat tightened around a dozen unsent letters. Ethan leaned in, reading. His mouth softened into the nearest thing he has to relief. "This is the last piece," he said quietly. "Provenance." Dad laughed once, short and tired. I thought tools and receipts wouldn't matter to anyone but me. I kept them anyway. Maybe I was keeping part of you. He looked up, and the apology in his face wasn't theatrical. It was earned. I missed a lot, Ellie. I'm late, but I'm here. Not every memory is pain, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. Some wounds, when touched again, prove we've healed. He breathed out, and some old stiffness left his shoulders. Your mother, Marjorie, she called me back then and said you were rebellious, that you'd chosen a different path. I didn't want to crowd you. I told myself sending money wasn't love, but it was something. He shook his head. Turns out it wasn't enough. It wasn't your job to fight my ghosts, I answered. But this, I tapped the receipt gently. This lets the past speak a language the present respects. We laid the items out like a small altar. The pen, the receipt, a photo Ethan printed of my 2005 Oculus sketch with its soft graphite halo. Agnes's photocopies in their careful sleeve. The evidence didn't shout. It made a shape and waited to be recognized. Dad told me small, ordinary things I didn't know I needed. How he'd kept a box labeled Ellen, tools, even when he moved twice. How he'd watched city projects in the paper to see if my name might appear, like a comet he'd missed. How pride can harden into cowardice if you let it sit too long. I listened, not to rewrite the past, but to give it a floor sturdy enough to stop creaking. When I finally stood, the room felt truer. I reached for him, and he reached back. And the hug was awkward for a second, and then not at all. I laughed and cried into his shoulder, tasting the salt of both. Dad, you came late, but justice didn't. He held me tighter. Ethan looked away a moment as if giving us a door to close, then squeezed my hand when I returned to the table. We scanned the receipt, photographed the engraving on the clip with a timestamp and a ruler for scale. Camille's habits had become mine. Ethan packaged the files into a clean folder, labeled and ready for the board. 2005_receipt_provenance/engraving_photos/portfolio_copies_affidavits. Outside, the street shone the way the city does when it's forgiven itself for the morning. Dad stood to go and hesitated at the doorway. Whatever happens in that room, he said, you already built the thing that mattered. The life. The rest is just paperwork catching up. The phone rang. The board requested to meet all parties tomorrow. The room that day was bright, as if even the sunlight wanted to witness the truth. The university's announcement chamber had been scrubbed to a ceremonial shine, maple paneling glowing, microphones aligned like small sentries, the seal of the Northwest School of Architecture stamped in brass behind the dais. It felt less like a room and more like a lens. Ethan's hand found mine beneath the table. His touch was steady, not triumphant. An anchor, not a flag. Professor Hayes stood along the sidewall, arms folded, the faintest nod acknowledging the long arc that had carried us here. The chairwoman adjusted her glasses and began without preamble. After review of archival materials, affidavits, digital forensics, and faculty testimony, she said, each noun a brick placed on bedrock. The board has reached its decision. Air held itself still. Somewhere outside, a gull called and was answered by nothing. The 2006 degree awarded to Ms. Lauren King is hereby revoked on grounds of misappropriation and fraud, the chairwoman continued. The matter is being referred to the state licensing body, with a recommendation for temporary suspension of practice pending further review. Pens clicked, cameras lifted. A reporter's flash pricked the air like static. For one astonished heartbeat, Lauren didn't move. Then the color drained from her face, and her mouth opened without finding a sound. Marjorie lurched to her feet, pearls jumping against her throat. "You're destroying my daughter's future!" she cried, voice pitched to carry beyond walls, beyond reason. "This is a witch hunt. Jealous women, petty men." I stood slowly, not to meet her volume, but to give my words a place to stand. "I'm not here to destroy a future," I said, my voice low enough that it recruited the quiet. "I'm here to reclaim my past." A scatter of shutters answered. Ink began its invisible work. The chairwoman repeated the procedural next steps, unglamorous and final. Registrar corrections, transcript annotations, notification to accrediting bodies. Hayes provided a succinct addendum, what had been obvious to trained eyes now formalized. Technique cannot convincingly fake understanding. Lauren wrenched free of Marjorie's hand and fled, the cameras catching the moment the door yawned and swallowed her. One moving frame that would be replayed until it became a symbol bigger than the girl in it. Marjorie called after her and then turned her fury toward me. But the room had already decided to listen elsewhere. We crossed the lobby on a raft of flashes. Headline scaffolding rose in real time on journalists' screens. Academic scandal of the year. Imposter architect loses degree. A radio producer thrust a mic toward me. "Do you have a comment for our listeners?" Ethan angled his body between us with a grace that didn't look like defense so much as geometry. His voice carried just enough to travel to the cameras and not an inch farther. "We answered with records," he said, echoing the line he'd given me in our dim, rain-stitched kitchen. "That's all we ever needed." He turned, threaded his fingers through mine. "It's over." Outside, sunlight pooled on the stone steps as if the day itself had been waiting to approve. Students drifted past with the cautious curiosity of witnesses who feel history, but don't yet have the language. Hayes paused long enough to touch the brim of his old cap, a small salute to a student whose line had finally been labeled correctly. "Build something generous," he said. "That's how truth stays built." We walked without hurry. The city had been rinsed overnight. In the windows, I could see our reflections passing through a grid of light that didn't flatter so much as reveal. My phone buzzed, then buzzed again. News alerts, messages from colleagues, a text from Agnes that read simply, "Proud of your hands." I opened none of it. The only screen I needed for the next 10 minutes was the sky. At a corner cafe, we stopped for breath we didn't strictly need. Ethan set his palm over the back of my hand, thumb mapping the small bones like a surveyor checking grade. There was no speech left in either of us big enough to suit the day. Relief doesn't perform. It settles. The world, newly balanced, did what worlds do. Kept turning. By mid-afternoon, the story had metastasized into the shape that would hold for a while. Push alerts marched across lock screens. Degree revoked. License recommended for suspension. Studio releases evidence dossier. A columnist who had once written about soft power in architecture posted a link to our firm's homepage with a line I almost liked. "When sunlight meets records, rumor is a temporary structure." I allowed myself a small, guilty smile. We reached the studio as the sun angled west. The motto in the lobby, "Integrity in every line," threw a pale glow across the floor, bright enough to read by. The staff looked up and then back down. The professional kindness of people who understand that some victories should be held in the bones, not paraded on the tongue. Camille stepped out of her office with a folder I didn't have to open to recognize. She lifted it as if to say, "Filed." I nodded thanks. Ceremony enough. My inbox pinged, once, then twice. I almost ignored it. Then the subject line caught my eye precisely because it wasn't shouting. Invitation. Community Arts Center. Design Lead Inquiry. I opened the message. A local nonprofit wrote with a plainness that felt like grace. They had followed the Waterfront Hub proposal and our firm's statement, they said. They admired the daylight, both literal and figurative. Would I consider leading the design for a new community arts center in a warehouse district that had never once been asked what it wanted to become? Budget modest, timeline realistic, stakeholders many. The kind of commission that doesn't gild a resume so much as make it honest. I felt the ground under me accept the new weight. I thought of the girl at 18 at a locked gate, the woman today holding keys, the line that had carried through both without breaking. I breathed in, breathed out, and let the next door open. Email from a local charity organization, inviting Ellen to design the Community Art Center. The ribbon is the color of a quiet sunrise, stretched across doors that used to open onto dust. A brass plaque by the threshold says, Ballard Community Art Center. But the building speaks a plainer language. Brick saved where it was honest. Glass where light wants to live. A roofline that curves like a held breath and never quite lets go. Reporters loiter near the steps. Neighbors cluster with cameras and strollers. The city smells of cedar and new paint. Inside, the atrium receives them the way an open hand does. No ceremony, just welcome. I don't stand on the stage at first. I stand off to the side and watch the light prove the drawings true. It pours through the curved skylight we modeled 100 ways and finally chose for how it behaves at 3 p.m. in summer. Warm, unafraid, a beam that does not blind. Children chase it like cats after a red dot. Laughter ricocheting up the glass and back down the hall where the studios wait, with clay and paper and the quiet miracle of a door left open. Camille finds me with a grin that has survived a dozen hearings and 1,000 footnotes. "Your line in rehearsal?" she says, mock stern. "I'm putting it on the brochure." I step up when they wave me forward. The podium is only a table with a microphone. That feels right. I used to be the person standing outside doors like this, I say, and my voice doesn't shake. Today, I'm here to open one for someone else. A small intake of breath rolls through the crowd. Pens move. A camera light blinks and then lowers, as if satisfied. Agnes takes my hand when I climb down. Her blue knit hat swapped for a pale scarf that makes her look like a quiet piece of sky. "Told you," she says, eyes bright. Truth has a way of finding its way back. I press her fingers and feel the pulse of an old courage that finally chose to show up. Thomas stands with Ethan near the model we built for the lobby. Foam and balsa and a tiny ribbon of mirrored acetate where the skylight bends. Dad holds the receipt in a protective sleeve like it's a small passport, the engraved pen clipped to his pocket. When sunlight slips across the atrium, the clip flashes, a thin, precise gleam, and the past nods to the present without needing to be forgiven. "Proud of your hands," he says. It lands in my chest and stays. Ethan leans close as the mayor thanks donors and a violinist tests a hopeful string. For a moment, it's just his breath and the hush between us. Em đã vẽ nên cả công lý, he whispers. Không, công lý tự hiện khi ta thôi sợ bóng tối, I answer, and I mean it. Justice isn't a monument. It's a maintenance plan. Keep the glass clean, the doors oiled, the lights honest. The rest follows. We tour the rooms like new tenants in a house we built with our own names. A print studio hums. The kiln room smells faintly of earth, about to become something it wasn't brave enough to imagine. A tiny library holds a shelf labeled, "Start Here." I slide a thin envelope between two books. My scholarship letter, finally opened, tucked where a stranger might stumble on it and learn that sealed things can still have futures. Camille snaps a candid and shakes her head. You realize this is the pull quote, right? She says, tapping her phone. I laugh and, without thinking, raise the engraved pen. In the skylight's curve, the reflection doubles it, a small silver constellation against glass. Light, pen, letter, honor. All the tokens return, not as trophies, but as tools. Outside, ribbons fall to pockets. Inside, the atrium fills with the ordinary music of people who aren't performing. A girl in a yellow dress presses her palm to the floor where the sun squares itself. A boy holds a folded program under the beam and declares it a stage. An elderly man sits on the long bench and smiles at nothing in particular, which is another way of saying everything. A reporter sidles up, gentle, and asks if I have a final comment for the story that's been following us like weather. I look up, then back at her. Tôi không contratu. Tôi chỉ cần ánh sáng để chiếu lại vào chỗ mà người ta tưởng đã chôn kín mãi mãi. She writes it down the way you copy a recipe you plan to cook for someone you love. Ethan squeezes my hand. The donors clap politely. The neighbors clap loudly. The children don't clap at all because they are busy being the reason any of this matters. I exhale a breath that took 18 years to complete and feel the building answer with a low, contented hush.